The Heir's mother, welcome to this channel, where the stories of the countryside teach us that neither money nor a surname can buy what truly matters. Stay until the end, because this story, that of a mother who fled to save her son, is going to touch your heart. The Heir's grandmother wanted them far from the world, locked away where no one could see them. And that's why a pregnant widow took her little one by the hand and fled to the only ranch that no one in their right mind would go looking. There are mothers who protect, and there are mothers who devour. Doa Imelda Carranza was one of the latter. And what Amparo didn't know, that early morning when she escaped barefoot through the back gate, was that in the most forgotten place of the desert there awaited her the family that blood had never given her. Amparo was 27 years old and 7 months pregnant when she was widowed. Her husband, Rafael, the only son of Doa Imelda, had died in a horse accident, leaving her alone with a 4-year-old boy, Rafaelito, and another on the way. The Carranzas were the most powerful family in the north of Sonora. Cattle, lands, a big quarried stone house in the town. And Rafaelito, being the first male grandchild, was the heir of all that empire. While Rafael lived, Doa Imelda tolerated Amparo. Barely, she considered her of little value, a ranch girl who had hunted her son for self-interest. She spoke to her with contempt in front of the visitors. She corrected the way she dressed, talked, carried the child. But with Rafael dead, the old woman showed her true intentions, and the little she disguised fell from her like a mask. She wanted the heir for herself alone. She wanted to raise him in her own way, far from the influence of that mother who, according to what she told whoever wanted to hear her, wasn't worthy of the Carranza surname. At first they were sweet words with hidden poison. "You're very young, my girl. Leave the child with me a while. I'll take care of him for you. You can't manage 2 children with mourning on top. Better that Rafaelito stay with me." Amparo refused again and again, with respect but with firmness, because her children were the only things she had left in the world. And then Doa Imelda changed tactics, and the sweetness turned to war. She began to say in the town that Amparo was unwell in the head, that the mourning had unhinged her, that she had seen her talking to herself, crying for no reason, neglecting the children. She released the poison little by little, in the church, in the market, with that plaintive voice of a worried grandmother. And the people, who owed favors to the Carranzas, nodded and repeated the gossip. Amparo noticed that the neighbors looked at her differently, that they lowered their voices when she passed, and understood that they were closing in on her, although she still didn't know what for. One afternoon, Amparo understood everything. She was looking for the child around the big house when she overheard, without meaning to, a conversation that froze her blood. Doa Imelda was speaking in a low voice in the living room with Don Eugenio, the family lawyer, a man with long fingers, a gold watch chain, and a short conscience, who had spent years arranging the dirty affairs of the Carranzas. Amparo stayed petrified behind the half-open door, with her heart pounding in her chest, and heard what was going to change everything. "It's all arranged now, ma'am," the lawyer was saying, satisfied. "I got 2 doctors. We'll sign that the widow isn't in her right mind. We declare her incompetent before the judge. You remain as legal guardian of the child and of the one on the way, and the administration of the whole inheritance passes to your hands until the little ones come of age, which, with luck, will be a long time." "And the girl?" asked Doa Imelda, without a gram of pity in her voice. "Her we send to a rest home far away, in the capital, where no one knows her or comes to ask about her. Far from the world, as you want. There they keep her for as long as necessary. No one's going to look for a poor madwoman. And will the doctors sign without asking questions? For what we pay them, ma'am, They sign anything and forget they ever saw her. By Friday we'll have her locked up and the 2 children under your guardianship. Consider it done." Amparo brought her hand to her mouth so as not to scream. There were 3 days until Friday. 3 days for them to tear her children from her and bury her alive in a madhouse. She had no one to turn to. Her own family had died. The whole town owed favors to the Carranzas. The law was bought. There was nothing left for her but one thing: to flee. That same early morning, before the rooster crowed, Amparo gathered the little that was truly hers, a mended blanket that had belonged to her mother, a rosary, a few coins, and a letter that Raphael had left her kept before dying, which she had never had the courage to open. She took the sleeping Raphaelito, wrapped him well, and went out barefoot through the back gate so as not to make noise, with her heavy belly and her heart in her throat. In the corral she found Lucero, an old gentle mare that had been Raphael's, the only one that didn't neigh at night. She saddled her as best she could, lifted the child on, mounted with difficulty because of the pregnancy, and got lost in the darkness of the desert before the house woke. She didn't know where to go. She only knew that she had to go where the Carranzas would never look for her. And then she remembered something Raphael had told her once, that in the most lost part of the desert, where the land seemed good for nothing, lived a couple of old people, the Madrigals, on a ranch so forgotten that it didn't even appear on the maps. Humble people who years before had worked for the Carranzas and whom the family had despised for being poor. "If you ever need to hide from the world," Raphael had told her jokingly, without knowing how much truth he spoke, "go to the Madrigals. Not even the devil reaches there." She rode 2 days along the dirt track and the dry plain, rationing the water, sleeping under the mesquites, calming the child who asked again and again why they had left home and when they were going to come back. Amparo didn't know what to answer him, so she sang him softly the same songs her mother sang to her, until the little one fell asleep in her lap. Lucero, the old mare, seemed to know the way, as if an invisible hand guided her among the hills. And at dusk of the second day, when Amparo already believed she had gotten lost forever in that sea of sand and thorns, she saw in the distance a thin thread of smoke rising among the hills. The Madrigal's ranch was barely an adobe shack, a corral, a few goats, and a well. But when Amparo arrived, exhausted and with the child crying from hunger, the door opened, and out came Doa Cleta, a slight little old woman with white braids, followed by her husband, Don Fidel, an old man with knotted hands and a noble gaze. They didn't ask her who she was or what she was fleeing from. Doa Cleta only saw the pregnant woman and the hungry child, and opened her arms. "Come on, my girl, come in. Here there's fire and there are beans. The rest, God will provide." And that night, for the first time in a long while, Amparo slept without fear. The days at the Madrigal's ranch healed Amparo little by little, the way the desert heals after the rain. Don Fidel taught Raphaelito to milk the goats, to look for the eggs among the straw, to give water to Lucero, to recognize the tracks of the animals in the sand. The child, who in the big house lived among prohibitions and silences, in the ranch ran free and laughed out loud for the first time in his short life. Doa Cleta taught Amparo to make goat cheese, to prepare remedies with the desert herbs, to knit blankets for the cold of the night. They were poor, very poor, but they lacked nothing of what truly matters. The old couple, who had never been able to have children, treated Amparo like the daughter heaven didn't give them. They saved her the best morsel. They arranged her bed. They stayed up when the pregnancy gave her discomforts. And Rafaelito they loved with that tenderness of grandparents that had stayed stored inside them all their lives without having anyone to give it to. A sweet and simple routine formed between them. Amparo, who came from a big quarried stone house full of coldness and of clocks that marked empty hours, discovered in that adobe shack the warmth she had never known. The mornings smelled of cafeteria and fresh tortilla. The afternoons went by in shared chores, in talks, in laughter. And at night, when the cold of the desert came down, Don Fidel took out an old out-of-tune accordion, and Doacleta sang songs of her youth with a cracked but cheerful voice, and Rafaelito danced clumsily around the fire until he fell asleep. The baby in Amparo's belly, who during all the morning had barely moved, as if sensing the danger, now kicked hard, restless and alive, as if he too had understood that he had at last found a calm and safe place to come into the world. Amparo touched her belly and, for the first time since Raphael's death, smiled for real. One night, when the ranch was already asleep, Doacleta sewed by the fire and Don Fidel dozed in his chair, Amparo finally dared to take out the letter that Raphael had left her kept before dying. The one she had never had the courage to open. Because to open it was to accept that he would not return. She brought the candle close, unfolded the paper with trembling hands, and began to read. What Amparo was about to discover, none of them had imagined. The letter was from Raphael, written months before dying, as if he had sensed his fate. In it he confessed to Amparo something he had never told her. He told her that he knew his mother well, that he knew what Doa Imelda was capable of, and that for that reason he had taken precautions in secret. He told her not to trust the family lawyers, that they all answered to his mother, and he revealed to her that without anyone knowing, he had been setting aside money for years, his own money, earned with his work in the cattle, and had kept it in a safe place to protect her and his children, whatever happened. Along with the letter came a folded paper, and inside the paper a small bronze key and a map drawn by hand. The money, said Raphael, was buried in an iron box under the old mesquite of the Madrigal's ranch. Because Raphael, as a child, had spent the summers at that ranch, hidden from his mother, and the Madrigals had been for him the loving grandparents that Doa Imelda never allowed him to have. That was why he had hidden his treasure there. That was why, without knowing it, Amparo had fled to the only place where her salvation was waiting for her underground. By the light of the candle, with trembling hands and her voice breaking at each line, Amparo read the letter to the old Madrigals. Don Fidel took off his hat and cried like a child on learning that the boy they had loved so much, that little one who spent the summers hidden in their ranch, had remembered them until the end in his last will. Doacleta crossed herself 3 times and murmured that God writes straight on crooked lines. And the 3 of them understood, at the same time, the incredible nature of all of it. That Amparo, fleeing blindly, without a plan, guided only by a memory and by an old mare, had arrived just at the only place on earth where her salvation waited for her buried. That same night, without waiting for dawn, the 3 of them went out to the patio with a candle stub and an old shovel. The desert wind blew cold, and the moon barely gave light. Don Fidel counted the steps from the trunk of the old mesquite, just as the map drawn by Raphael marked, and began to dig slowly, because his strength no longer gave for more. Rafaelito, woken by the noise, watched from the door of the shack embracing Doacleta. At half a yard deep, the shovel struck something hard, a sound of metal. Don Fidel knelt and, with his hands, finished uncovering a heavy iron box covered with earth and time. They took it out among the 3 of them and carried it inside to the warmth of the fire. Amparo put the small bronze key into the rusted lock. It was hard to turn, and at last the lid gave way with a creak. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, gleamed gold coins, more than Amparo had seen in her life, enough for her and her children to live with comfort and dignity the rest of their days. But what truly mattered to her was not the gold. Beneath the coins was another document, folded and sealed, a letter signed by Raphael before a notary, where he left it on record that that money was the exclusive property of his wife Amparo, earned with his work and set apart from any Carranza inheritance, and that neither his mother nor anyone of the family had any right over it. Amparo pressed the document against her chest and cried, but this time not from fear or from grief. She cried because she understood that Raphael, from the grave, was still taking care of her, that he had foreseen the wickedness of his mother and had extended a hand to her through death. And because she knew, at last, that she was no longer defenseless, that she had the means to defend her children. But the peace lasted little. Doa Imelda was not a woman to give up, and the wounded pride gnawed at her more than the loss itself. She spent a fortune on trackers. She bribed muleteers, cowboys, every man who crossed the desert. For weeks she found nothing, because the Madrigal's ranch didn't appear on any map and no one in their right mind went there. Until a muleteer, for a few coins, remembered having seen a pregnant woman mounted on an old mare, with a child in her arms, moving off toward the lost hills of the east. And one morning, when Amparo's baby was barely a few weeks old and slept in a cradle that Don Fidel had carved for him, the dust of the road announced what everyone feared. A black carriage advanced among the mesquites, followed by 2 riders. Doa Imelda arrived at the Madrigal's ranch dressed in mourning and in arrogance, accompanied by Don Higinio the lawyer and 2 men of the law whose will she had bought. "I've come for my grandchildren," said Doa Imelda, without even getting down from the carriage, looking at the humble shack with a contempt she didn't bother to disguise. "This woman is demented. I have papers from 2 doctors that prove it, and an order from the judge. Hand over the children the good way, or I take them the bad way. You, pair of starving wretches, have nothing to say here." Amparo came out of the shack with the newborn in her arms and Rafaelito clinging to her skirt, pale but serene. Behind her, slowly, Don Fidel and Doa Cleta stood up, 2 old people who could barely hold themselves up on their tired legs, but who didn't take even half a step back. The lawyer got down from the carriage with a smug smile and began to read aloud the false papers, the declaration of incompetence, the names of the bought doctors, the guardianship in Doa Imelda's name, all in order, all bought. But then Amparo, with a calm that surprised even herself, handed the baby to Doa Cleta, took from her shawl the document that Raphael had signed before a notary, and took a step forward. "Before you keep reading your bought papers," she said, with a firm voice that didn't tremble, "read this. It's your son's handwriting, Doa Imelda. Raphael's signature. And the seal of a notary who doesn't owe you a single cent." Don Higinio took the paper reluctantly, read it over, and suddenly the smile vanished from his face. He read it again, more slowly, going pale. It was a legitimate document, sealed and dated months before Raphael's death, that proved that Amparo had her own economic means and that her husband had declared her, before the law, fully capable and the sole one responsible for the raising of her children. But there was more. In a final clause, Raphael expressly named the Madrigal couple as backup guardians of the children in case of his death, leaving his own mother, in so many words, out of any decision about his children and his inheritance. This can't be," stammered Doa Imelda, getting down at last from the carriage and snatching the paper from the lawyer. But on recognizing the unmistakable handwriting of her dead son, the signature she had seen so many times, her voice broke for the first time in her life, and the arrogance dissolved on her face like salt in water. It was then that Don Fidel, the humble old man whom the Carranzas had always despised for being poor, took off his hat, took a step forward, and spoke with a serene dignity that not all the gold in the world can buy. "Ma'am, with all respect I tell you, your son Raphael was more our son in 3 summers than yours in a whole lifetime, because you raised him to command and inherit, and we, who had nothing to give him, loved him, just so he would be happy. These children stay where their father wanted them to be, with their mother, who loves them, and with the 2 of us, who though old and poor, do know how to love them." The silence in the desert was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop. The 2 men of the law, on seeing the authentic documents, took a step back, because one thing was to charge for intimidating a widow alone, and a very different thing to meddle with notarized papers. Doa Imelda looked around her. She saw the firm old people, she saw the serene Amparo, she saw her grandson hidden behind his mother's skirt, looking at her with fear. And for the first time she understood that she had lost, not because of the papers, but because not even her own son had trusted her. She got into the carriage without saying a word, white with humiliation, and left the way she came, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a surname that all over Sonora would begin to be pronounced with contempt when it was known what she had tried to do. She didn't go to prison. No one touched her. She only lost her grandchildren, lost her reputation, and was left alone in her big quarried stone house, which suddenly felt emptier than ever. When the rains passed and the desert bloomed with that brief spring that only those who live in it know, the Madrigal's ranch was another. With Raphael's coins, Amparo didn't move to any city nor buy any mansion. She did something that left everyone who learned of it perplexed. She stayed. She had a deeper well dug that gave abundant water. She bought cattle. She built new adobe rooms next to the shack, and she turned that forgotten ranch into a prosperous and living land. It turned out that the land no one wanted, the one everyone believed dead, hid a good mantle of water, and with water in the desert, everything blooms. Lucero, the old mare that had carried her to salvation crossing 2 days of desert, now grazed fat and calm in the shade of the mesquite, and at dusk came back alone to the corral, followed by the new animals, the goats, the cows, the newborn calves that filled with life and bleeding that ranch that one day was almost dead. Rafaelito grew up strong and happy among the animals and the open field, far from the prohibitions and the silences of the big house. And the baby, whom Amparo named Fidel, in honor of the old man who had received them without asking, took his first tottering steps holding on to the knotted hands of the old man, who cried with joy every time the child called him Tata. One afternoon, all of them seated in the new corridor watching the sun fall over the desert, Doa Cleta took Amparo's hand. "You know, my girl, all our lives we asked God for a child, and one never came. By the time we were old, we had lost hope." She smiled, with her eyes full of tears. "And just look how he sent us a daughter and 2 grandchildren in a single stroke, mounted on a mare, when we didn't even expect them anymore." Amparo embraced her, and embraced Don Fidel, and knew that those 2 poor old people had given her what all the wealth of the Carranzas could never give her: a home. Sometimes God puts the exact people on the exact path, just when we believe we are most alone, to remind us that the true family isn't the one we get by blood, but the one that receives us with open arms when we have nothing to offer. Who appeared in your life just when no one looked at you anymore? and extended a hand to you without asking you for anything in exchange. If this story touched your heart, leave us a comment telling us from which corner of the world you're joining us. Give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that we're never as alone as we believe. Thank you for accompanying us to the end, from heart to heart. With time, when some lost traveler arrived at that ranch looking for water or shade, Doa Cleta received them with beans and fire, just like that first night. And the people of the desert began to greet Amparo in a different way when they crossed her in the town, with that quiet respect that is held for one who lost everything and, instead of becoming hard, became a refuge for others.